They said a barren woman was worth less than cattle. So when Alara's womb gave no children, her parents sold her like unwanted stock. But the man who chose her, a lonely Apache widower with 2 little ones, wasn't looking for a wife to bear him sons. He was looking for someone who could heal the silence in his home. The first whisper came softly, like a chill that slid beneath the door of Alara's father's house. Barren. The word was not said to her face, but she felt it in the way women's eyes slid over her belly flat after 3 years of marriage. Felt it in the way her husband avoided her bed, no longer hoping for the cry of a child to echo in their small hut. Alara was 22, still young by many measures, yet in her village a woman's worth was measured in the life she carried within her. Each season that passed without a child tightened the noose around her throat. At first, her husband was gentle. He would say, "The gods give in their own time," but when the 4th spring came, and his brother's wife delivered another boy, patience soured into bitterness. His touch became cold. His words sharpened. One night, when the embers in the hearth burned low, he spoke without meeting her eyes. "You are empty soil, Alara. Nothing will grow in you." The next morning, he was gone. Her parents did not rage at him for leaving. Instead, they turned their fury upon her. Her mother's voice carried the venom of the entire village. "You've cursed us. What man will honor our family now? We fed you, clothed you, and for what? To be returned like spoiled fruit?" Alara bore the shame in silence, but inside her a storm raged. She wanted to scream that she was more than a womb, more than a vessel to be filled or discarded. But what use were words when her father sat in the corner with his head bowed, saying nothing, as though her disgrace had deafened him? The whispers grew. Women who once shared bread with her now crossed the road when she walked to the well. Children, not old enough to understand cruelty, still repeated their mother's hushed words. Barren, cursed, useless. Nights stretched long. She pressed her face into her blanket, weeping in silence, afraid that even her tears marked her as weak. She began to wonder if perhaps the whispers were right, if something within her was broken, hollow, unworthy of love. But the worst wound came when her parents made their decision. It was a gray morning, with the smell of rain pressing down from the clouds. Her father's voice was flat, as though he had rehearsed it. "You will be sold." "Alara." The words rang in her ears, heavy, impossible. She blinked, not understanding. "Sold? Like an animal?" Her mother did not flinch. "Better that you bring something back to this house than nothing at all. A daughter who cannot give children is not a daughter, she is debt." Her father did not meet her eyes. That silence was the deepest betrayal of all. The days that followed blurred together. A stranger came to weigh her value, not in terms of her spirit or her labor, but like cattle at the market. He inspected her hands, her teeth, her frame. She clenched her jaw, refusing to cry in front of him, but inside she felt the floor tilt beneath her, as if her whole life had become a trap she could not escape. At night, she prayed not for deliverance, for she no longer believed the gods listened, but for strength not to break when the day of her sale arrived. The village waited, curious eyes pricking her back wherever she went. She could hear them whispering, "Who would take her?" She cannot give children. The suspense of not knowing who might claim her was worse than the shame. Would it be some cruel old man who wanted a servant? Would it be a stranger from another land who saw her only as property? Or would no one come at all, leaving her family with nothing and her life with even less? Her nights grew restless. Each time the wind rattled the shutters, she imagined footsteps, someone arriving to take her away. The thought both terrified and strangely relieved her. Anything, even the unknown, seemed better than the slow death of staying where she was no longer wanted. On the final night, as the fire crackled low, Alara looked at her reflection in a small copper dish. The face staring back at her was pale, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. But there was still something unbroken in her gaze. "They will not see me weep," she whispered to herself. "They may sell my body, but they will not own my spirit." And with that vow, she braced herself for the dawn, the day her fate would be sealed by the highest bidder. The morning of her sale dawned with a pale sun, its light thin and cold, as if even the heavens wanted no part in what was about to happen. Alara stood at the edge of the village square, her wrists loosely bound with a strip of leather not tight enough to hurt, but enough to mark her as possession. A crowd had gathered. Not large, but large enough. Men with hungry eyes. Women with mouths twisted in disdain. Children, curious and wide-eyed, clinging to their mother's skirts. Alara forced her chin high. If they would reduce her to cattle, then she would be the proudest animal they had ever seen. She would not give them the satisfaction of watching her crumble. Her father stood beside her, his jaw stiff, his eyes fixed anywhere but on his daughter. He looked more like a man trying to sell off a debt than a father forced to part with flesh and blood. Her mother was worse. Cold satisfaction glimmered in her gaze, as though this act would scrub away the shame Alara had brought upon their name. The village elder, gray-haired and stooped, stepped forward with a staff in his hand. His voice carried across the square. "This woman, Alara, daughter of Torin and Maris, stands without husband, without child, without legacy. Her family offers her to those who may find use in her. Let any man speak who would claim her." The words pierced her like a blade. "Without legacy." As though she were already a ghost, a long silence followed. The crowd shifted, whispers darting like insects. Alara's stomach knotted. Would no one step forward? Would she stand here until the sun set, humiliated twice over first Baron, then unwanted even as a servant? Finally, a man stepped forward. He was broad in the belly, his tunic stained with grease from too many meals. His grin revealed a row of yellowed teeth. "I'll take her," he said, his voice oozing with smugness. "A woman with no children still has hands to work my fields. And perhaps," his eyes crawled over her body, "her barrenness is not as permanent as some think." The laughter that rippled through the crowd burned her cheeks. Her mother leaned forward eagerly. "What will you pay?" But before he could answer, another man interrupted. Tall, hawk-nosed, with a scar across his cheek, he strode into the square. His eyes were sharp, assessing, like a trader inspecting goods. "2 goats," he offered flatly. "Strong and young. More than she's worth, but I'll be generous." The words fell heavy, each syllable stripping her humanity away. She was no longer Alara, just value weighed against livestock. Her father nodded quickly, too quickly. 2 goats is fair. But then, from the edge of the crowd, another voice spoke. Deep, calm, steady. "I will take her." Every head turned. He stood apart from the others, a tall man with dark hair tied back, his clothes worn but clean. His skin was sun-bronzed, his features marking him as Apache. At his side clung 2 small children, a boy and a girl half hiding behind his legs. Their eyes, wide and watchful, were fixed on Alara. The square fell into uneasy silence. Foreign blood was not welcomed easily in this village. Some muttered under their breath. Others frowned openly. Her mother sneered. "And what do you offer, outsider?" The man met her gaze without flinching. "A horse. Stronger than any goat. And shelter for your daughter, if you care for that." A murmur swept the crowd. A horse was far more valuable than 2 goats. Her father's eyes widened. Even her mother, calculating and cold, hesitated only a moment before nodding sharply. "Done." The man stepped forward, untying the leather from Alara's wrists with a gentleness that startled her. He did not leer. He did not gloat. He simply looked into her eyes, as though searching for something. For a moment, Alara forgot the crowd. She forgot the shame, the whispers, the sting of her parents' betrayal. All she saw was a quiet strength in the stranger's gaze, and the small hands of two children reaching for him, clinging as though he were their whole world. Her parents did not hug her, did not bless her, did not even say her name. They turned away as though she were already gone. Alara swallowed the lump in her throat. She had been sold like cattle, yes, but to a man whose eyes did not carry hunger or scorn. A man who, unlike her own blood, seemed to see her as something more than a price. Still, fear coiled in her chest. Who was he truly? And why would a man with two children choose a barren woman? As he led her away from the square, the villagers' whispers buzzed behind her like a swarm of angry bees. Suspense pressed on her like a weight. She did not know if she had been delivered from ruin or simply walked into a fate darker still. The road out of the village was rough, little more than a trail worn by hooves and cartwheels. Alara walked beside the stranger in silence, her wrists now free, though her spirit still felt bound. Each step away from the square, away from her parents in different faces, carried both relief and dread. The man said nothing at first. His stride was steady, unhurried, his children trailing close behind. Alara stole glances at him when she thought he would not notice. His shoulders were broad, his movements deliberate, the kind of man who lived more by action than by words. His skin bore the sun's mark, and faint scars mapped his hands that had worked, fought, endured. The children clung to him like roots to soil. The boy, no older than 6, carried a small carved figure of a bird, its wings smoothed by years of touch. The girl, perhaps 4, clutched a faded piece of cloth. Eyes wide and wary as they darted toward Elara. It was the children's eyes that unsettled her most. Not because they were unfriendly, but because they were familiar. That same wariness, that same quiet hunger lived inside her. Finally, the man spoke. His voice was deep, even, carrying no hint of mockery. "My name is Koa." Elara hesitated, uncertain if she should answer. Her throat tightened, her voice rough when it finally broke free. "Elara." Koa nodded once, as though filing the name carefully in his mind. Then he gestured to the children. "This is Rian and Luma." The boy held her gaze for a heartbeat, then looked away. The girl hid behind her father's leg, peeking out with wide eyes. Elara forced a small smile, though her lips trembled. "Hello." Neither child spoke. But Luma's fingers curled tighter into Koa's tunic, as though claiming him against the intrusion of this strange new woman. The silence stretched. Elara's heart thudded. She had expected cruelty from this man mocking words or greedy stares like the others in the square. Instead, there was only stillness. A watchfulness that weighed on her like a cloak. At last, unable to bear it, she asked the question gnawing at her chest. "Why?" Her voice cracked and she steadied it. "Why would you choose me?" The others, you must have heard what they said. "I am barren." Koa did not stop walking. His eyes remained on the path ahead, but his words were clear. "I did not need another womb." The bluntness of it made her blink. He glanced at his children then, his expression softening just slightly. "They already have a mother," he said quietly. "She is gone. But they still need one." The words sank into Elara like stones into deep water. Gone. She looked again at the children, at the shadows in their eyes, at the way they clung to him like lifelines. The weight of their loss pressed on her chest. Still, suspicion lingered. People rarely acted without want. She studied him carefully, searching for cracks, for some hidden cruelty. "So you mean to say, you chose me not for children of your blood, but for theirs?" Koa met her gaze then, his eyes dark, steady, unflinching. "I chose you because you looked as though you knew what it was to be cast aside. They need someone who will not abandon them when the burden grows heavy." Her breath caught. The truth of his words pierced her, raw and merciless. He had seen her shame, her pain seen it, and not recoiled. Yet his honesty unsettled her even more than lies would have. What if she failed? What if she tried and the children never accepted her? What if she proved her parents right, that she was useless, empty, unworthy of love? The silence returned, but it was different now, charged with unspoken questions. She kept walking, her mind a storm of doubt and fragile hope. As the sun sank toward the horizon, Koa finally slowed. He looked at her again, not with desire, not with contempt, but with a quiet steadiness that unnerved her more than either. "You are not a servant, Ilara," he said. "You are not a debt to be paid. You will walk beside me." Not behind. Her breath hitched. The words were simple, but they carried a weight she had never known. For the first time in years, she was not being measured by her womb, her shame, or her parents' pride. And that terrified her, because if she was more than those things, she no longer knew who she was. That night, as they reached the edge of the forest where Koa's home lay hidden, Ilara looked at the children again. Rian clutched his little bird, Luma pressed her face into her father's leg. And Ilara, the barren daughter, the discarded wife, the woman sold like cattle, wondered if, in their eyes, she might yet become something she had never been allowed to be, a mother. The forest closed around them like a secret. Branches arched overhead, weaving shadows across the path. Ilara followed Koa and the children deeper into the unknown, each step pulling her farther from the only world she had ever known. Her village was behind her now, its gossip, its cruelty, even the stone faces of her parents. Yet leaving did not erase the wounds. She felt them trailing her like ghosts, whispering in her ear, barren, cursed. Sold. The children moved silently at their father's side. Rian's small fingers clutched the carved bird so tightly Ilara thought it might splinter. Luma walked, with tiny, determined steps, though every so often she glanced back at Ilara as though half expecting the woman to vanish into the trees. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. Strange bird calls echoed in the distance. For the first time in her life, Ilara felt untethered not just from home, but from everything familiar. Each crunch of leaves beneath her sandals seemed to announce her vulnerability to the forest itself. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, finally breaking the silence. "How far is your home?" Koa didn't glance back. "Before nightfall." That was all. 2 words. She almost laughed, bitter and sharp. Her father had never wasted many words either, but his silence had always carried judgment. Koa's silence was different. Heavy, yes, but not cruel. Still, the absence of talk left her alone with her thoughts. She studied the broad lines of his back, the way the children clung to his presence, and she wondered again why fate had led her to this man. Why he had chosen her when others could have offered him women younger, fertile, untainted by shame. Rian slowed, stumbling over a root. Koa reached down, steadying him without a word, his large hand enveloping the boy's small one. Ilara watched the simple act, her chest tightening. No man had ever touched her with such steady gentleness, not her father, not even her husband before he turned bitter. She longed to speak to the boy, to ask if he was hurt, but she held back. The children's eyes still held suspicion, and she feared any clumsy attempt at kindness might widen the distance between them. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, slanting golden beams through the trees. Hunger gnawed at her, but she bit her tongue rather than complain. She would not appear weak. Finally, Koa called a halt near a stream. The children crouched to drink, their reflections rippling in the water. Koa filled a water skin, his movements sure and practiced. Then his eyes lifted, meeting Ilara's across the clearing. "You should drink," he said simply. Ilara knelt by the stream. Cold water kissed her lips, crisp and clean. She closed her eyes, savoring it more than she expected. When she opened them again, Rian was staring at her. His eyes, dark, serious, did not waver. "What?" she asked softly, almost apologetically. The boy didn't answer. He only studied her as though trying to decide if she was dangerous or safe, truth or lie. Finally, he turned back to the stream, shoulders stiff. Her chest ached. He did not know her story, but he didn't need to. Children sense things: loneliness, fear, the weight of absence. And in her, he must have seen both a threat and a possibility. They set out again, the path narrowing, winding between tall ridges. As twilight deepened, the forest seemed to shift. Shadows grew longer, branches clawed at the sky, and every sound felt magnified: the crack of a twig, the rustle of unseen animals. Elara's heart quickened. What did she know of survival in such places? If he left her here, she would be lost within the hour. But Koa walked with steady confidence, the children keeping pace without fear. He belonged here. She did not doubt at last. As night began to fall, the trees opened onto a clearing. Smoke curled lazily from a chimney built into a sturdy cabin of wood and stone. A small garden, half wild yet tended, grew beside it. The air carried the faint, homely scent of herbs. "This is home," Koa said simply. The children hurried ahead, slipping inside as though released from silence. Elara stood at the edge of the clearing, her throat tight. Home. The word felt like a blade and a balm at once. She wanted to believe it, but fear gnawed at her. Was this place sanctuary or another prison dressed in softer walls? As Koa held, the door opened for her, his eyes unreadable. Elara stepped across the threshold with a heart heavy with questions and the faintest spark of hope. The cabin's door creaked as Elara stepped inside. The air was thick with the faint scent of smoke and pine, and beneath it, something older, like the lingering echo of laughter that no longer lived here. Her eyes swept the room. A large hearth sat at the center, its embers glowing faintly. A rough-hewn table with mismatched chairs leaned against the wall. Woven blankets, worn but carefully folded, lay stacked in a corner. Everything was tidy, yet it bore the silence of a place that had lost its music. Koa set down the waterskin near the door, moving with a quiet purpose that filled the space. The children slipped past him, shedding their little burdens. Rian placed his carved bird carefully on the table, as though it were something sacred. Luma dragged her faded cloth to the hearth and curled against it, thumbs slipping into her mouth. Elara lingered at the threshold, unsure if she was welcome. The cabin was modest, but it felt alive in a way her parents' house never had. There was no judgment here, no eyes watching her belly, no whispers about her worth. Still, she hesitated. Koa noticed. He gestured toward the hearth. "You are tired. Sit." His voice was not commanding, but it carried weight. Elara obeyed, sinking onto the wooden chair nearest the fire. The warmth licked her skin, soothing muscles sore from the journey. Yet she could not shake the feeling of being an intruder. Koa busied himself with preparing food-root vegetables, dried meat, a handful of herbs he crushed with practiced hands. The children watched him, their silence heavy. Rian's eyes flicked occasionally to Elara, sharp and distrustful, as though daring her to prove herself worthy of the seat she had taken. When the stew began to simmer, Koa finally spoke. "This house has stood for 6 winters. My wife built it with me. Every stone, every beam." Her hands touched them. Elara's heart jolted. She glanced at the children. Their faces were still, but their silence deepened, like a river pulling sorrow beneath its surface. "I will not ask you to replace her," Koa continued, stirring the pot. "No one could. But my children need more than bread and fire. They need gentleness, stories, laughter, things I cannot always give." His words settled heavy in the room. Elara swallowed, unsure how to answer. She wanted to protest, to say she was not fit for such a role, that she had failed at motherhood before she ever began. But his gaze, steady and unwavering, silenced the excuses forming in her throat. The stew was served. Wooden bowls were passed. Rian ate cautiously, still glancing at her between bites. Luma curled against her father, sipping slowly, her little eyes drooping with fatigue. Elara lifted her spoon. The flavor was simple but nourishing. She hadn't realized how hollow her stomach was until now. She finished quickly, then set her bowl aside, folding her hands in her lap. The children continued to watch her. The weight of their stares pressed against her chest. Her voice faltered. She steadied it. I do not know how to be what you ask. Koa leaned back, his expression unreadable. Do not try to be more than yourself. That is enough. His words, spoken so plainly, shook her more than any demand could have. No one had ever told her she was enough. Not her parents, not her husband, not even herself. Later, when the children were laid to sleep, Rian clutching his bird, Luma wrapped in her cloth, Elara found herself alone near the hearth. The fire crackled softly. Shadows played on the walls, and the silence pressed around her like a living thing. She looked around the cabin again. The folded blankets. The simple tools. The faint scuffs on the floor where children's feet had once danced. This house did not need her hands to sweep or cook. It needed something else, something she was not sure she had left to give. Her parents' words rose in her mind. Empty soil, debt, cursed dot, and yet. As she listened to the slow, steady breathing of the children in their sleep, she felt a flicker of defiance. If this house needed a heart, perhaps she could be it. Not because she was whole, but because she understood what it was to be broken. The fire popped, sending a spray of sparks upward. Elara drew her shawl tighter, whispering a vow to the flames. They may have sold me, but I will not be worthless here. Behind her, in the doorway, Koa's shadow lingered. He did not speak, but his gaze softened for the briefest moment before he disappeared into the dark. The days that followed passed slowly, heavy with silence. Elara rose with the sun, helping where she could, sweeping, fetching water from the stream, mending worn garments. Koa never ordered her, never scolded her, but his quiet eyes seemed to weigh everything she did. The children watched too, their stares sharper than their father's. Rian's gaze was guarded, suspicious, as though he waited for her to stumble. Luma, small and fragile, clung to her father's leg whenever Elara entered a room, peeking out with wide eyes. The distance between them was a wall Elara could not climb yet. Each night when she lay by the fire, listening to their breathing, she told herself she would not give up. She remembered her own childhood, how she had longed for a smile from her parents and rarely received one. She would not let these children feel the same emptiness. It began one morning with the smallest of chances. Rian sat on the step outside the cabin, carving at a piece of wood with a dull knife. His little brow furrowed in concentration, his hands awkward but determined. Elara knelt nearby, keeping her voice gentle. What are you making? The boy didn't look up. A bird, he muttered. His tone held a sharp edge, daring her to mock him. Instead, she nodded. Like the one you keep on the table? His head jerked up, surprised she had noticed. It was my mother's, he said, then quickly bent back to his work, as though the words had slipped out by mistake. Elara's heart ached. She wanted to reach out, to touch his small hand, but she kept her distance. She must have been very skilled, she said softly. If you keep it, it must be precious. Rian's lips pressed tight, but he didn't send her away. That was something. Later that same day, as she prepared a meal, Luma wandered close, dragging her faded cloth across the floor. Elara offered her a small piece of bread. The child stared at it, hesitant, until Elara took a bite herself and smiled. Slowly, with trembling fingers, Luma accepted the piece. It was the first time their eyes truly met. The little girl's gaze was wary, but beneath it was a hunger, not just for food, but for warmth, for safety. Alara whispered, "It's good, isn't it?" Luma nodded, crumbs clinging to her lips. Then she scurried back to her father's side, but Alara's heart swelled with quiet triumph. The turning point came days later, when rain lashed the forest and kept them trapped indoors. The cabin grew dim, the air heavy with dampness. The children sat listless, boredom settling over them like a fog. Elara, restless, searched through the shelves and found a bundle of dry sticks. She tied them with twine, shaping them into a small puppet. With a scrap of cloth, she gave it a face. When the children glanced up, she held the puppet high, making its voice playful. "Good evening. I am the forest spirit, and I've come to see who lives in this warm little house." Luma's eyes widened. Rian tried to mask his interest, but his lips twitched. She made the puppet wobble dramatically, bumping its wooden head against the table. "Oh dear, my legs are too short. Can someone help me stand?" A giggle broke the silence, soft, startled, but unmistakable. Luma clapped her tiny hands, her face lighting with joy. Even Rian smothered a laugh, though he quickly scowled, as if embarrassed by his betrayal. Ilara's chest burned with warmth. That sound, children's laughter, filled the cabin like sunlight piercing through storm clouds. For the first time, the house felt alive. Koa returned from splitting wood to find the scene, his daughter shrieking with giggles, his son trying not to smile, and Ilara kneeling on the floor with a ridiculous puppet in her hand. For a moment, his mask slipped. His lips curved just barely into something close to a smile. His eyes softened as they rested on Ilara, though he said nothing. That night, as the children fell asleep still grinning, Ilara sat by the hearth with quiet tears on her cheeks. Not of sorrow, but of something she hadn't felt in years, belonging. She realized then that she had been wrong all along. She was not barren. Her hands had sown laughter into a house that had forgotten it, and in the laughter of two children, she found a seed of hope blooming within herself. The cabin began to change. Not with new wood or fresh paint, but with something far harder to measure. Laughter, once absent, now slipped into the corners. Children's footsteps pattered across the floor again, quick and light. Even the hearth fire seemed to burn warmer. Ilara noticed the shift most at dusk. When the work of the day was finished and the children's eyes grew heavy, the silence that followed no longer carried the weight of grief. Instead, it settled soft, like a blanket across weary shoulders. She had begun to carve out a place for herself, Rian grudgingly asking for help smoothing the wings of his bird carvings, Luma crawling into her lap without warning, her tiny hands tugging at Ilara's shawl. Those moments filled the cracks inside Ilara's heart, though she dared not name the feeling, and yet the one she understood least was Koa. He was a man of few words, but his presence carried a steadiness that anchored the cabin. She caught him watching her sometimes, not with hunger, not with pity, but with a quiet searching, as though measuring her against some truth only he knew. One evening, as the children drifted to sleep, Ilara sat by the fire mending one of Rian's tunics. The thread slipped through her fingers, her stitches neat and careful. Koa returned from the woods, his shoulders damp with mist, carrying a bundle of kindling. "You work too hard," he said, setting the wood aside. Ilara looked up, startled. Praise or anything close to it was rare in her life. "It is only a torn seam." "Even so," Koa replied, lowering himself onto the bench across from her. "You have done more than you realize." The firelight caught his face, softening the hard lines carved by years of loss. For a moment, the silence between them was not heavy, but full like soil after rain. Elar, I dropped her gaze, heat rising in her cheeks. "I have done nothing great. I only try. That is what matters. The simplicity of his words struck her. No man had ever told her that effort, not outcome, held value. She clenched the fabric tighter, her throat thick. The following days revealed more of his quiet kindness. He began showing her the ways of the land, how to find the best kindling, how to set snares, how to read the tracks of deer and foxes. He spoke sparingly, yet always with patience, as though he believed she could learn anything if given time. Once, when she slipped on the mossy bank of the stream, his hand caught hers. It was not the grasp of a master to a servant, but the steady grip of someone who refused to let her fall. She pulled back quickly, her pulse racing, but the warmth of his hand lingered long after dawn at night. She found herself listening not only to the children's breathing, but to his slow, even, rhythm that calmed her in ways she could not explain. Still, fear shadowed her heart. Affection was dangerous. Love, even more so. She had been discarded before, abandoned as worthless. What if this man, too, one day decided she was not enough? One twilight, as they stood outside watching the children chase each other in the grass, Alara dared a question. Why did you not choose another woman? One who could give you more sons? Koa's eyes followed his children, his voice low. I did not need more sons. I needed someone who would stay when things grew hard. Someone who understood loss. He turned then, his gaze meeting hers. You carry sorrow, Alara, but you do not let it drown you. That is strength, her breath caught. Strength. The word sounded foreign in her ears, as though it belonged to someone else. And yet, when he spoke it, she almost believed it could be hers, that night. As she tucked Luma into her blanket and Rian placed his carved bird carefully by his side, Alara realized she had grown to love them as though they were her own. Not because blood demanded it, but because her heart had chosen it, and in the quiet, unspoken moments she shared with Koa, hands brushing as they passed a bowl. Eyes meeting across the fire, she felt a fragile bloom stir inside her chest. Not the fire of passion she had once imagined, but something deeper. Roots sinking into soil that had long been barren. Love. The kind that blossoms not from blood, but from the choice to stay. The first snow of winter fell softly over the forest, blanketing the cabin in quiet white. Alara stood by the window, watching flakes drift past the glass. Her reflection stared back at her, no longer the pale, trembling woman who had been led away from her village, but someone steadier. Her shoulders no longer bowed beneath shame. Behind her, laughter rippled. Rian and Luma tumbled near the hearth, their voices bright as they invented a game with carved figures. Their giggles rose and fell like music, filling the cabin with a warmth that fire alone could not provide. Alara turned, her heart swelling. Every day since her arrival, the children had pulled her closer, weaving her into their world without even realizing it. Rian now handed her his carvings for approval, pride hidden beneath his solemn eyes. Luma no longer hid behind her father's leg, but climbed eagerly into Alara's lap, demanding songs and stories. She had not birthed them, but in their laughter, in their trust, she had been reborn. Koa entered quietly, snow dusting his shoulders. He shook the cold from his cloak and looked around the room. His gaze rested on the children first, his anchor, his purpose, and then on Alara. For a moment, his eyes softened in that way she had come to recognize, as though he saw her not as a stranger or a bargain, but as someone essential to this home. You've made the place warmer, he said simply, setting down a bundle of firewood. The words pierced her, gentle and fierce all at once. Her parents had told her she brought nothing but shame. Her husband had called her empty soil. But here this man, this house, these children saw her as warmth. That evening, as the stew simmered and shadows danced across the walls, Koa spoke again. His voice was low, careful. I do not regret the horse I gave. Alara froze, her spoon hovering above the pot. She turned to find him watching her, his expression unreadable, though his eyes held something deeper than she had ever dared hope. "You are worth more," he said. Her throat tightened, tears burning her eyes. No dowry, no trade, no bargain had ever measured her so dearly. For the first time in her life, she was not a burden or a debt. She was a gift. When the children finally slept, their small breaths steady and safe, Alara sat near the fire. Koa sat opposite her, his presence filling the silence. The flames flickered between them, casting light over the lines of his face. "I used to think," she whispered, "that I was cursed, that I would never belong anywhere. But now—" Her voice faltered. She swallowed hard. "Now I don't feel barren." Koa did not answer with words. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes steady, his silence carrying more weight than speech. In his gaze she saw the truth. He did not see her as cursed. He saw her as chosen. The fire cracked, sending sparks upward. Alara felt warmth spread through her chest, deeper than the hearth, deeper than the room. She thought of the village that had cast her out, of her parents who had sold her, of the whispers that had once named her empty, and then she thought of the children's laughter, of Koa's quiet steadiness, of the cabin that had grown into a home. She was not barren. She had planted joy, trust, and love in soil richer than she had ever known. And it had blossomed. That night, as she tucked the children in, Rian mumbled drowsily, "Good night, Mother." Alara froze. The word trembled in the air, fragile yet radiant. She bent and kissed his forehead, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Good night, my son," she whispered. In that moment she knew. She had found her place, not through blood, not through duty, but through love freely given and returned. A home at last.